Ireland hides its horrors well. Behind its beauty lie places where the past still breathes, and not all who entered walked away unchanged. These are three of the country's most haunted stories. If you're drawn to true tales that unsettle and stay with you, subscribe for more. Case 1. Loftus Hall, the Devil's Guest. On the stormy coast of County Wexford, Ireland, sits Loftus Hall, a massive gray and brooding mansion perched near the sea, its windows staring blankly out over the rocks like watchful, cursed eyes. To most tourists, it appears just another decaying estate with a dramatic past. But to those who've entered its halls and felt the air shift around them, Loftus Hall is something else entirely, a place where something evil once knocked and may never have left. The story begins in the late 18th century when the Loftus family occupied the house. Charles Tottenham, who had married into the Loftus family, lived there with his second wife and daughter from a previous marriage, Anne. By all accounts, Anne was a bright but lonely young woman. Her world was confined to the cold stone walls and strict etiquette of the aristocracy, and her only joy was walking along the windswept coast near the estate. Then came the storm. One night, as winds howled and waves crashed violently below the cliffs, a ship appeared to wreck off the nearby shore. The family, following tradition, opened their doors to any survivors. From the storm came a stranger, tall, elegant, and refined. He claimed to be the lone survivor, and the family welcomed him into the hall. Anne, fascinated by the stranger, was quickly taken with him. He was unlike any man she had ever met, well-spoken, darkly handsome, and intelligent. Over the following days, he seemed to charm not only Anne, but the entire household. Yet there was something odd about him. Servants whispered of how his footsteps never echoed on the marble floors, of how animals avoided him, of how he never seemed to eat, only pretended to. Then came the card game. The family gathered one evening for a round of cards in the grand drawing room. The fire crackled low, casting long shadows along the ornate ceiling. Anne sat across from the stranger. As she reached down to retrieve a card, she had dropped something caught her eye. Something no one else could see from their position. The man's feet. They weren't feet at all, Anne would later gasp. They were hooves, cloven, blackened. Animal. She screamed a sound that pierced the walls of Loftus Hall and echoed into legend. The man rose, furious eyes ablaze with something inhuman. Then, in a flash of smoke and fire, he vanished through the ceiling, leaving behind a scorched mark that never faded, no matter how many times it was scrubbed, painted, or replaced. Anne was never the same again. Her laughter ceased. Her appetite vanished. She began wandering the halls at night, talking to no one, standing for hours in front of mirrors, or clutching a crucifix until her knuckles went white. She refused to leave a particular room, the very drawing room where the stranger had vanished. Eventually, her family locked her away in that room. Days turned to months. The servants heard crying, then silence. When she died, the family, ashamed of the scandal, and rumors refused to bury her in the family crypt. Her body was placed in a makeshift coffin and buried in unconsecrated ground. Some say that's why her spirit never found rest. Visitors to Loftus Hall report cold spots, sudden nausea whispers in empty rooms. Tour guides tell of lights flickering without cause, of doors slamming shut, in windless stillness of a presence that seems to linger most strongly in the drawing room. In 2014, the house was reopened for public ghost tours. Within months, paranormal investigators from across Europe arrived, drawn by the legend. One group, armed with thermal imaging EMF detectors and high-frequency sound monitors, reported something chilling. During their overnight investigation, one of their team members collapsed in the hallway near the staircase, claiming she had felt a crushing sadness, like someone was screaming silently into her skull. In their recordings, they later found a voice, just a single word whispered in a breathless rasp: "Run." Another visitor snapped a photo on the grand staircase, and captured what appeared to be the silhouette of a young woman in old-fashioned clothing, head-bowed, hands clasped. A priest brought in to bless the house refused to return after his first visit, citing a presence that mocks holy words. Skeptics point to the age of the building, to the power of suggestion, to the drafts and creaks of old wood. But even the skeptics leave the house a little paler than they arrived. What's perhaps most disturbing is that the site of the supposed devil's exit, where he blasted through the ceiling, was repaired, but the wood above it continues to decay unnaturally fast. No matter how many times it's patched, sealed, or reinforced, it blackens, buckles, and splits, like something doesn't want it closed. And then there's the mirror. In the drawing room, a large antique mirror was discovered in storage during a 2008 renovation. It hadn't been touched in decades, hidden behind tarps and old paintings. When workers unwrapped it, they found a foggy handprint, child-sized, pressed from the inside. They cleaned it, but the print returned. Twice. The third time, the mirror cracked. After that, they left it covered. Local legend says that if you stay in Loftus Hall overnight and wake up at 3:33 a.m., you'll hear footsteps echoing down the hallway. Not shoes, not boots. Hooves. The question isn't whether the devil visited Loftus Hall. The question is, did he ever really leave? Case 2. The Hellfire Club. Satan on the Mountain. In the rolling hills outside Dublin, perched atop the desolate Montpelier Hill, stands a crumbling ruin wrapped in wind and legend. It's called the Hellfire Club, and its story isn't just Ireland's, it's one of the most sinister whispers in all of Europe's haunted history. Built from ancient stones, stolen from a Neolithic burial site, the structure was cursed before the first brick was even laid. Locals say that when workers moved the stones, a sudden violent storm tore through the area, as if something ancient and buried did not want to be disturbed. What rose from those desecrated stones in the early 1700s was a hunting lodge. It was built for William Connolly, one of the wealthiest men in Ireland. But after his death, the building passed into darker hands, into the possession of a secretive group of wealthy men known as the Hellfire Club. They called themselves a drinking club, but what happened behind those thick stone walls had little to do with alcohol and everything to do with ritual blasphemy and fear. These were the elite nobles, judges, men of power, and they gathered at the lodge under the cover of darkness to defy every moral law the country held dear. Stories began to surface, stories that grew darker with every retelling. One night, a stranger is said to have arrived during a storm. Dressed in fine clothes, he asked to join the group for cards. They welcomed him, delighted by his skill and charm. But then one of the men dropped a card beneath the table and, bending down to retrieve it, saw the stranger's feet. They weren't feet at all, they were cloven hooves. The stranger vanished in an instant, leaving behind nothing but scorched wood and the acrid smell of sulfur. The men never spoke of it again. Another tale tells of a farmer who was invited to witness the games of the club. When he returned to his village the next morning, his hair had turned white. He never spoke again and died within the week. And then there were the black masses, inverted rituals, animal sacrifices, and blasphemies shouted into the night. Locals swore they could see flames flickering through the ruined windows, hear chants carried by the wind, and smell burning flesh even from the base of the hill. They stopped going near Montpelier Hill after sunset. Some refused to even speak its name. But not all horror stayed in the past. In 1740, a fire tore through the lodge during one of the club's gatherings. The official story says it was an accident, a spilled drink, and an open flame. But others believe the building itself fought back, that the spirits of the disturbed burial site had had enough. After the fire, the club disbanded, but the damage was done. The site never recovered. Animals refused to graze near it. Birds avoided its walls. Hikers reported sudden unexplained nausea and headaches when approaching the ruins. Some said they felt watched. Others heard footsteps in the empty halls or smelled sulfur in the clean Irish air. And then came the stories of the elemental. It began in the 20th century, long after the club was gone. Paranormal investigators who visited the Hellfire Club reported a presence, not a ghost, not a demon, but something older, something primal. They called it the elemental. The first encounter came from a woman named Mildred Darby, who was part of the family that owned the land. She wrote of being touched by a cold, clawed hand in the dark, something invisible yet solid, something that reeked of decay. When she turned, no one was there. Later investigators described the same a hunched figure with a shadowed face, glowing red eyes, and a stench like rotting meat. Some said it whispered, others said it growled. But all agreed on one thing: it hated them. One paranormal team claimed to have captured photos of a crouched form lurking behind a doorway. The image was grainy, blurred by movement, but unmistakably wrong. The proportions were off, the limbs too long, the eyes too deep. Skeptics tried to explain it away as bats, as tricks of light, as overactive imaginations. But no skeptic stayed on the mountain past sunset. Today, the Hellfire Club is a ruin open to the public. It draws curious tourists, ghost hunters, and those chasing legends. But ask any local and they'll warn you the same way their grandparents did. Don't go after dark. Don't stand alone. And if you smell sulfur, run, because something still lives there. Something never left. They say history is written by the victors, but legends, especially those born in the shadows, are written by survivors. And the Hellfire Club. It's a story no one walks away from unchanged. Case 3. Leap Castle, the Bloody Chapel and the Elemental. In the rolling countryside of County Offaly, Ireland, stands a structure that has witnessed centuries of bloodshed, betrayal, and bone-deep fear: Leap Castle. Rising from a limestone outcrop like a wound in the land, its silhouette is stark against the sky. Those who approach often feel it before they see it, a weight in the chest, a whisper of something ancient and watching. Leap Castle is considered one of the most haunted buildings in the world. But unlike the typical ghost stories, this castle harbors something darker. Its walls have absorbed not just sorrow, but violent secrets, and something far more primal, an entity that doesn't just haunt, it contaminates. The story begins in the 15th century, when the O'Carroll clan, a fierce and war-hardened Irish family, seized the castle. They were not known for mercy. Internal power struggles often ended in blood. One of the most infamous tales comes from within the castle's chapel, now known as the Bloody Chapel. The O'Carroll brothers were at odds over control of the clan. One was a warrior, the other a priest. During a mass held in the chapel, the warrior brother stormed in and drove a sword through the priest's heart right at the altar. The priest fell where he stood, his blood soaking the stone. Witnesses claimed the air turned heavy and silent, as if the castle itself recoiled. From that day on, the Bloody Chapel lived up to its name. Visitors over the centuries reported feeling cold, even in summer. They heard chanting when no one was present. Some said they saw a hooded figure, hands clasped, as if still in prayer, floating near the altar before dissolving into air. Others claimed they were pushed, physically shoved by invisible hands, as if the space still rejected the living. But the priest's murder was just one layer of the horror. In the early 1900s, workers renovating Leap Castle discovered a hidden room behind a wall near the chapel. What they found was a vertical shaft, an oubliette. Inside were human skeletons piled atop one another, impaled on wooden spikes at the bottom. It wasn't just a few. There were enough bones to suggest dozens, possibly hundreds of people had met their end there. The shaft had been designed not for imprisonment, but for disposal. The O'Carrolls, it seemed, had thrown enemies and dissenters into the darkness and left them to die. When the bones were removed, it took 3 full cartloads to clear them. Some of the skeletons were small, too small. Children. The castle wasn't haunted because of one murder. It was soaked in deliberate, systematic cruelty. But the darkest presence of all wasn't any of the souls that perished there. It was something older, something that didn't live, but also didn't die. It's called the elemental. No one knows exactly what it is. It's not the ghost of a person. It doesn't behave like a spirit tied to tragedy. Those who've encountered it describe a presence that feels alien, ancient, and foul. Some say it predates the castle itself, that it may be a remnant of pagan rituals long buried by time, a curse sealed into the stone. Accounts of the elemental vary, but they all agree on one thing: it brings dread. Mildred Darby, a former resident of Leap Castle in the late 19th century, claimed to have seen it. She described it as a thing about the size of a sheep, thin, gaunt, its face human, but with a twisted expression of malice. It had black cavities for eyes and a smell like a rotting corpse left in stagnant water. It didn't appear often, but when it did, the atmosphere changed. People felt sick, physically ill. Some collapsed, some hallucinated. Visitors would report overwhelming despair or panic with no visible source. The room would grow cold. Lamps would flicker and die. Animals refused to enter. People would later be unable to explain what they saw, only that they had felt an evil too deep for words. Some researchers believe the elemental may have been summoned or awakened through occult rituals. In the 1600s, the castle passed into the hands of the Darby family, some of whom were rumored to have dabbled in dark arts. Mildred herself wrote Gothic horror novels under a pen name and was said to be fascinated with the supernatural. Whether by accident or intention, something may have been stirred that should have remained buried. Today, Leap Castle still stands. It has been partially restored, and the current owner lives there with his family. But he too acknowledges the strange events. Doors open on their own. Footsteps echo through empty halls. Music plays from unseen sources. And sometimes the chapel grows cold again and the shadows seem to move. Visitors from around the world come seeking the thrill of a haunting. Some leave amused. Others leave silent. Not all places are haunted because of tragedy. Some places are haunted because something wanted them that way and stayed. At Leap Castle, it's not just what died there that haunts the walls. It's what watched it happen and never left. Not all legends fade. Some places remember, and some things never left. If stories like these stay with you, there are many more waiting. Subscribe and follow the silence.